let's get right into it. Number 9. The Green Children of Woolpit. Imagine you're a farmer in medieval England, just doing your thing, harvesting crops near some ancient wolf pits. Suddenly, you spot 2 children emerging from the pits, but these aren't normal kids. Their skin is green. They're wearing strange clothes, speaking a language no one understands, and they refuse to eat anything except raw beans. Well, this actually happened in the 12th century in the village of Woolpit, England. The villagers took the children in. The boy, unfortunately, became sick and died. But the girl survived, eventually learned English, and was able to tell her story. She said they came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where it was always twilight and everyone was green. For centuries, people dismissed this as just another medieval fairy tale. But modern scientists think these kids were probably suffering from something called chlorosis, also known as green sickness. It's a form of anemia that can actually turn your skin greenish. Their unknown language was probably Flemish. These might have been orphaned children of Flemish immigrants who got lost in the woods. During that time, there were Flemish settlements nearby that had been recently massacred. The Twilight Realm could have been their way of describing the dense, dark forests they wandered through. The girl, by the way, eventually lost her green color after starting to eat normal food. She even married a local man and lived a pretty normal life after that. Number 8. The Eugogo. On the Indonesian island of Flores, locals tell stories about small, hairy people they call Eugogo. According to legend, these creatures were about 3 feet tall, or about 90 centimeters. They could walk and run quickly, and they loved to steal food. Most scientists ignored these stories until 2003. That's when archaeologists found something shocking in a cave on Flores. They discovered the bones of a tiny human species. They named it Homo floresiensis, but most people call them hobbits. These creatures were exactly like the ones in the local legends. They were about 3 feet tall. They had long arms and short legs. They used tools and could hunt. The most recent remains are only 50,000 years old. That's incredibly recent in evolutionary terms. Some scientists think they might have survived even longer. The local stories about Eugogo are surprisingly specific. The legends say they spoke in murmuring sounds. This suggests they had some form of language, which is possible given their brain size. The stories even say they were hunted to extinction after stealing too much food from villages. Number 7. The Legend of the Amazon Warriors. So there's this ancient Greek myth about a tribe of warrior women. They were the most terrifying warriors in the ancient world. The Greeks called them Amazons. These women were said to be so fierce that even the greatest Greek heroes feared them. Most modern historians laughed at these stories. They said they were just Greek fairy tales. But in the 1990s, archaeologists started finding something interesting in Russia. They uncovered graves of women buried with weapons. Not just a few graves, hundreds of them. These women had battle injuries on their bones. They were buried with arrows, spears, and horses, just like in the ancient stories. Carbon dating proved they lived between 900 to 200 BC. That's exactly when the Greeks were writing about them. Number 6. The Green Man of Pennsylvania. In 1981, people around Pittsburgh started reporting something weird. They kept seeing a glowing green man walking along dark roads at night. Most people thought it was just an urban legend. But then the police started getting involved. They actually caught the guy. His name was Raymond Robinson. When he was 8 years old, he touched an electrical line and was electrocuted. The accident destroyed his face, leaving him severely disfigured. He lost his eyes, nose, and one arm. To avoid people staring and being cruel to him, Raymond chose to stay hidden from the world. He only went out for walks at night. Because of his injuries, his skin had a greenish tint that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Raymond became known as the Green Man or Charlie No-Face. He walked the roads around South Park Township for decades. People would drive out hoping to spot him. Some would leave him cigarettes and beer. Raymond died in 1985 at the age of 74. Number 5. The Kraken. For centuries, sailors told stories about a massive sea monster that could drag entire ships to the bottom of the ocean. They called it the Kraken. Most people wrote these stories off as drunk sailors seeing things. Modern scientists now know that there are giant squids that can grow longer than a school bus. But here's where it gets really interesting. These giant squids live in the deep ocean, sometimes as deep as 3,000 feet. They rarely come to the surface, which is why they were considered a myth for so long. In 2004, scientists finally managed to photograph a live giant squid in its natural habitat. It took them 400 hours and 100 trips in a submarine to get those photos. The photos confirmed what those old sailors had been saying for centuries. These creatures are real, and they're terrifying. While they probably can't sink ships like in the legends, They do battle sperm whales. Scientists find giant squid sucker marks on sperm whales all the time. Think about that for a second. These giant squids are regularly fighting with one of the largest predators on Earth. Number 4. The Wendigo. Native American tribes in the northern United States and Canada told stories about a terrifying creature called the Wendigo. According to legend, this monster was once human, but after being forced to eat human flesh, it transformed into something horrible. The Wendigo was said to get taller and thinner as it ate, always hungry, never satisfied. For years, people thought this was just a scary story to keep kids from wandering into the woods. But then scientists started studying something called Wendigo psychosis. This is a real medical condition where people develop an intense craving for human flesh. Even after eating normal food, they still feel hungry. The condition was most common in isolated communities during harsh winters. When food was scarce, some people resorted to cannibalism to survive. But here's the terrifying part. Once they started, some couldn't stop. Even when food became available again, they still craved human flesh. The most famous recorded case was in 1878, when a Cree trapper named Swift Runner killed and ate his entire family. This happened during a winter when food was actually plentiful. He claimed to be possessed by the Wendigo. Modern psychiatrists now recognize this as a culture-bound syndrome. That means it's a mental illness that only appears in certain cultural contexts. Number 3. The Mapinguari. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, indigenous tribes tell stories about a terrifying creature. They call it the Mapinguari. According to legend, it's a giant sloth-like creature that walks on 2 legs. It has long claws and a terrible smell. For years, scientists dismissed these stories as folklore, but then they started finding evidence of something interesting. Paleontologists discovered that giant ground sloths lived in South America until relatively recently. These weren't your cute little tree sloths. These were massive beasts that could stand 20 feet tall on their hind legs. They had huge claws and were covered in thick fur that probably harbored lots of bacteria. That would explain the smell in the legends. The most recent remains of these creatures date to around 10,000 years ago. Number 2. The boiling river of the Amazon. For centuries, people in the Amazon told stories about a river so hot it could kill you. They said it could boil small animals alive. Most scientists thought this was impossible. Rivers don't just boil without a volcanic heat source, and there are no active volcanoes in that part of the Amazon. But in 2011, a geoscientist named Andres Russo decided to check it out. He found exactly what the legends described. A river that actually boils. The water temperature reaches 196 degrees Fahrenheit or 91 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to give you third-degree burns in seconds. The river is called Shanai Timpishka, which means boiled with the heat of the sun in the local language. But the sun isn't what's heating it. The water is being heated by a massive fault system deep underground. Hot water from deep in the earth rises up through cracks in the rocks. It's basically a giant natural hot water system. The river is about 4 miles long. Animals that fall in are literally cooked alive. Local shamans have known about this river for generations. They consider it a sacred place of healing. Number 1. The legend of rogue waves. Sailors have long told stories about massive waves that appear out of nowhere. These rogue waves were said to be twice the size of the highest waves around them. They could snap ships in half and disappear without a trace. Most scientists thought these stories were exaggerated. They said waves that big couldn't just appear randomly. Then came New Year's Day, 1995. The Dropner oil platform in the North Sea recorded something impossible. A 84-foot wave appeared suddenly in the middle of 40-foot seas. They had scientific instruments measuring it, so this wasn't just some rumor. Since then, satellite technology has proven that rogue waves are very real. They appear about once every 10,000 waves. But what causes them? Scientists now think they're caused by something called wave focusing. Multiple wave trains meet at just the right moment, combining their energy. It's like several smaller waves stacking on top of each other. The scary part is that these waves are almost impossible to predict. They can form in any ocean, at any time. Some scientists think they might be responsible for many unexplained shipwrecks throughout history. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.